Welcome back. Let's continue from our last video. In the previous video you saw that Professor Kelthas was determined to prevent Dane from qualifying for the autonomous major and certain that coming from the house of spearmen Dane lacked the necessary sword skills. To guarantee his failure, Kelthas arranged a sparring match with a simple condition: if Dane failed to land a hit he would be disqualified. However, to his astonishment, Kelthas found himself struggling to fend off Dane's relentless attacks, the young fighter's technique eerily reminiscent of a warrior from the Denric Empire. Next, Dane met his older sister Claire outside the schoolyard. She seemed a bit surprised that he had completed the test so easily. She asked in astonishment if he had really passed. She found it strange, noting that Professor Kelthas was not someone who readily passed students. She mentioned that he only participated in one regular meeting a year, but this time the headmaster had called him and he really disliked any kind of hassle. Hearing this, Dane found it somewhat hard to believe and complained that Kelthas really seemed to live by his own rules. Claire responded that that was why she was surprised, but she was relieved that nothing bad had happened. Dane saw Claire laugh, which made him feel a little pleased inside. He thought about his second sister, noting that while she didn't praise him, her relief at his safety was one of the reasons he liked her. At that moment, their sister Arabella came running from afar, calling out Dane's name, wondering where he was. She noticed him with Claire and exclaimed happily that he had passed the test, hadn't he? The moment all three sisters gathered, people around them began to gossip excitedly. They remarked on the Sogres sisters getting together, noting that Arabella and Claire alone were amazing, but now the youngest was even better than his older sisters. They secretly wondered what kind of family they came from. After that, Dane followed a guide to tour the dormitory area. The guide introduced himself as Max Yahello, explaining that he was in charge of all dormitory operations. He told Dane that the dormitory was divided into 3 sections based on entry levels, and the highest ranked area was called Dronzer, named after the first emperor. Since Dane was the top student in the autonomous major, he would be staying in this section. Max assured him that the dining hall, training ground, and library were all up to standard, and there were also resting rooms and magic viewing rooms. Additionally, he mentioned secret facilities that might or might not be available, but depending on Dane's school course, he might have to leave this section. Max also added that Arabella and Claire stayed in this area, but they were just there to graduate. Then he took out a key and handed it to Dane, explaining that they would provide 2 spare keys and to let him know if he lost them. He cautioned Dane to be careful, as there were a lot of strange students there. He clarified that they weren't bad people, but sometimes unexpected things happened. Max then told Dane to check the room and to let the logistics department know if he needed anything. After speaking, Max left immediately. Dane exhaled, wondering if he should go check the room. He then quickly walked around to explore, muttering to himself that it was really high class. However, he found it strangely quiet, noting the absence of any human presence, as if everything had evaporated. He frowned, pondering what exactly was going on. Driven by immense curiosity about the situation, Dane closed his eyes and focused on diffusing the energy within his body, spreading it outward. He attempted to disperse his sensory aura, wondering if it would work. As he did so, his energy slowly expanded, flowing into every corner of the dormitory. Soon vivid images began forming in his mind. He caught a faint whiff of oil, followed by the subtle sound of gears clicking into place. A trap, he realized. At that moment, Dane started piecing things together, a faint smile appearing on his lips. So that's how it is, he muttered. This must be some kind of initiation. Just as he suspected, somewhere within the dormitory, a group of students was closely watching him through a simulated display. When they saw Dane standing completely still, refusing to move, a red-haired student curiously asked why he wasn't moving, wondering if he actually had sharp instincts. Beside him, a blue-haired student turned and grumbled, questioning if Arnold thought the new student had already figured out all the traps. Arnold, a young man with an air of confidence, simply smiled, adjusted his glasses, and responded with absolute certainty that it was impossible. He declared that the jeweler family had been the finest hunters for centuries and that he had complete faith in his traps. This handsome student was none other than Arnold Goulard, the eldest son of Baron Goulard and a third-year student in the shooting department. Despite Arnold's firm declaration, one of the students in the group couldn't help but feel a little uneasy, hesitantly asking if it wasn't dangerous. Arnold chuckled, reassuring them that he wasn't foolish enough to set up anything truly harmful. He explained that he had removed anything that could actually injure Dane, stating that it was just enough to make a fool out of him. Seeing that there was no real danger, the students' nervousness quickly turned into excitement as they eagerly anticipated Dane's humiliation. One of them sneered that this first initiation was going to be fun, predicting that the kid would be in a miserable state by the time he made it through. Arnold's voice carried a mocking tone as he smirked. But then a voice of concern suddenly spoke up, questioning if this was okay, reminding them that they were talking about the Sogres family and that they had all gone through their own memorable initiation. Arnold scoffed, telling them to just watch, predicting that Dane was going to be so terrified he might pass out. He spoke with such ease, completely unbothered by any consequences. After all, when it came to noble families, minor pranks among their younger members were hardly something that would force the adults to intervene. Unlike Arnold's confident demeanor, a girl in the group furrowed her brows and reminded him if he had forgotten that Dane was the valedictorian of the Spearmanship division, suggesting that this time things might be different. She pointed out that his two older sisters were both geniuses, and if he had managed to get into the Spearmanship division, it meant he was even more talented than they were. This girl was Priscilla Nerial, a member of the prestigious Nerial family and a fourth-year student in the neurology department. From Arnold's perspective, her skepticism hit a nerve. He widened his eyes and snapped, questioning what she was implying and if she thought Dane wouldn't fall for his traps. Before Priscilla could respond, a brown-haired student nearby teased, suggesting that even Arnold wasn't so sure about it himself. Arnold bellowed at him to shut up, calling it nonsense. Despite his loud protests, deep inside his anxiety was mounting. Adjusting his glasses, he tried to reassure himself with optimistic reasoning, stating that there was no way Dane could see through his traps, as he had used stealth techniques and even applied oil to muffle any mechanical sounds. Just as he was thinking this, Dane suddenly started moving again, sending the entire group into a frenzy. Someone shouted that he was on the move for real, and everyone rushed forward, scrambling to find the best vantage point. Back to Dane, he thought that compared to the traps he had faced before, especially the ones set up by Lady Lily, these were nothing more than child's play. One glance was all it took for him to see through them. He identified a rope trap, realizing that one slight touch would cause it to snap. He decided to use a magic bullet instead. Without hesitation, Dane gathered mana into his palm and fired a magic bullet straight at a brown sack hanging from the ceiling. The moment it was hit, the sack burst open, sending a cascade of water pouring down like a waterfall. However, upon observing the amount of water, Dane was slightly surprised, thinking it was less than he had expected. But before he could dwell on it, something unexpected happened. A stone tile on the floor suddenly slid open, releasing a thick brownish gas that immediately spread into the air. The stench was so unbearable that Dane nearly passed out on the spot. He muttered in irritation about the disgusting smell and how childish this was. Back at Arnold's group, their anticipation of watching Dane embarrass himself had completely flipped into frustration, and all of that frustration was now directed straight at Arnold, the one who had so confidently declared that his traps were foolproof. Someone angrily questioned what the hell that was, reminding Arnold that he had said there was no way Dane would notice the traps and demanding to know what he meant by no way, stating that Dane had seen through it right at the start. Arnold stammered, struggling to find an excuse, calling it just a coincidence, a total fluke. Priscilla's voice dripped with suspicion as she repeated the word fluke, but Arnold nodded furiously, doubling down on his claim that he had gone too easy on Dane in the beginning, insisting that he would fall for a trap. Seeing his determination, the other two boys exchanged glances and hesitantly nodded, suggesting they give Arnold another chance. Hearing this, Priscilla could only sigh inwardly, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at her as she wondered why she felt so anxious about this. Meanwhile, Dane continued walking down the hallway and soon came across the second trap. With just a glance, he immediately saw through its design. Sighing in disappointment, he murmured that this one was just as sloppy as the first, wondering if he should just destroy it and be done with it. As the traps Arnold had set were triggered, numerous boxing gloves suddenly flew out from all directions around the hallway, shooting randomly in every direction. However, with Dane's exceptionally agile movements, he was able to effortlessly dodge each one without breaking a sweat. Even the intricately arranged spike traps designed with great care couldn't touch him. Inside the observation room, as they watched Dane's performance, the group of young students was left utterly speechless, muttering in awe that this was just as expected from the Sogres family. Meanwhile, Arnold's face had gone blank as he watched his carefully crafted traps become utterly useless in the face of someone like Dane. Even his two friends in the room were beginning to lose all faith in him. One of them remarked with disbelief that it was like Dane knew exactly where everything was, even though Arnold had worked so hard to hide them. But Arnold, unable to accept the embarrassment, gritted his teeth and muttered that it was too soon to give up, insisting that there was no way Dane was going to avoid the last trap. Priscilla, sensing his frustration, hesitated before asking what the last trap was. Without giving a clear explanation, Arnold merely grinned, mysteriously saying that they would see soon enough. And so, in no time, they witnessed the final trap Arnold had prepared. Before Dane stood a massive red dragon, and behind it there was another huge goat-headed monster. From Dane's perspective, upon seeing these large monsters appear before him, he immediately made a guess that these must be summoned beasts, noting that they looked like they had prepared some pretty strong ones. He nodded in admiration before something odd caught his attention. He furrowed his brow, focusing intently as he spoke, realizing that the images of these monsters seemed to flicker and distort, not quite real. He concluded that this was just an illusion trying to scare him without real strength, noting that no wonder they looked suspiciously strong. He thought that a normal student might have run away by now, but not him. He decided he didn't need to dodge. All he had to do was disrupt the mana flow and they would disappear on their own. As Dane focused his energy into his palm, the students in the observation room were completely stunned by his lack of fear. One of them gasped, wondering why he wasn't running away and noting that he even looked pretty calm, then questioning what he was planning to do, asking if he was concentrating mana. That sentence hit Arnold like a thunderclap. His face broke into a cold sweat as panic took over. He wondered in disbelief if Dane had realized they were just illusions, questioning how that could be possible in the blink of an eye. The more he thought about it, the more worried he became. Priscilla, standing behind him, clicked her tongue and shook her head, whispering that it was all ruined. Back with Dane, after gathering enough energy, he unleashed it directly toward the illusionary monsters. In an instant, the illusions shattered, vanishing as though they had never existed. Once done, Dane smirked and said that it was a joke, wondering where the person who set this up was hiding. Cut to Arnold's group. For some reason, they suddenly bolted out of the observation room, their faces filled with pure panic. One of them shouted that it was an Edorak and questioned why that thing was there, yelling at Arnold to do something. But Arnold, terrified out of his mind, had no strength left to fight back against the gigantic wolf chasing them. He screamed, asking what the hell that thing was. The red-haired student asked urgently if that was the thing Arnold had prepared. Just then, the giant wolf opened its massive mouth and let out an ear-splitting roar, causing the red-haired student to scream in fear. At that moment, Dane's voice echoed from nearby, asking if this was where they were hiding. Hearing the familiar voice, Arnold's group saw a glimmer of hope and turned toward him, pleading for help. They asked the new guy if this was his doing and if he could handle it, promising to apologize if he would get rid of that thing. Back to Dane, after feeling that he had sufficiently intimidated the upperclassmen, he canceled the summoning of the wolf, causing it to vanish through the portal. It wasn't until it had completely disappeared that the students were finally able to exhale in relief. Next, the long-haired student adjusted his clothes and somewhat awkwardly began talking to Dane. He introduced himself as Droyan Valentine, a fifth-year student from the alchemy department and the sole heir to the Valentine Marquis family. He was well-built and quite handsome. As he spoke, he extended his hand. Dane, seeing this, reached out and firmly shook it, replying that it was a pleasure to meet him. Meanwhile, in his mind, Dane couldn't help but wonder what the heck this guy was talking about. Not picking up on Dane's inner thoughts, Droyan continued to praise him, saying he was really good at avoiding traps and asking if he was majoring in something like autonomous major studies, suggesting that that must be why the initiation ceremony had failed and that Arnold was really disappointed. Droyan eagerly explained that Arnold was the heir to the famous Ghoulard hunter family and the one behind all these traps, which made Arnold extremely embarrassed. He shouted at Droyan for dragging him into this. Dane smiled to himself, realizing that Arnold was the one who had designed those traps. Droyan then called the others over, asking them to come and say hello. The group responded quickly, moving forward. Droyan then pointed to the girl named Priscilla and introduced her as a fourth-year student in the Holy Magic Department, advising Dane not to mess with her as she wanted to become a priest. Before Droyan could finish his sentence, Priscilla, having already figured out what he was about to say, swiftly pushed him aside and cut him off, saying she was kind and beautiful, right? She introduced herself as Priscilla, the abandoned child of her family, explaining that joining the Holy Magic Department meant she could kiss any dreams of marriage goodbye. In response to this, Dane gave a nod, saying that he was looking forward to working with her, and after that both of them shook hands as a form of greeting. However, immediately after, Priscilla's eyes widened in shock, almost as big as saucers, as she sensed the terrifying amount of energy within Dane. She exclaimed in disbelief, questioning why his mana was so dense, and if this was really the mana level of someone their age, calling it unbelievable and impossible. Behind them, Droyan seemed a bit confused as he saw Priscilla overreacting like that, asking if it was really such a big deal. The red-haired guy replied that it must be, while Arnold also seemed a little annoyed by the situation, muttering that they were making a big deal out of a little dense mana, not paying attention to him. The red-haired student stepped forward and introduced himself as Skal Hespro, a second-year student from the martial arts department. He clarified that he wasn't like those muscle heads, explaining that while muscle was important, martial arts wasn't just about strength. He added that anyone could see that, and if Dane was interested, he would teach him real martial arts. Then Dane's gaze moved to the last person, Arnold, who arrogantly turned his face away, as if he didn't care about the introductions. His uncooperative attitude annoyed the others a little. Someone asked Arnold what was up with him, noting that it was his turn and questioning if he was upset because his traps got destroyed, calling it petty and small-minded. The group scolded him, causing veins to bulge on Arnold's forehead. Left with no choice, though irritated, he reluctantly turned to greet Dane, but the only thing he said was his name, Arnold Ghoulard. That was all that came out of his mouth. Fortunately, Dane didn't mind much. He remained cheerful despite Arnold's grumpy attitude, introducing himself as Dane Sogres, saying it was nice to meet Arnold. Arnold still seemed annoyed that all his traps had been defeated, and Dane silently wondered if he should compliment them. Not wanting to look at Arnold's gloomy face anymore, Dane decided to offer a few compliments. He said that these were really good traps and that Arnold seemed to understand the mechanisms and activation well. However, he pointed out that the paint was easy to spot, suggesting that he try mixing F3 silver and D6 black in a 4:6 ratio instead of using F6 black at this level of brightness, as it would be harder to notice. Other than that, he concluded that this was a trap that anyone would fall for. On the side, the group couldn't help but be stunned by Dane's talent, as he offered advice on improving the traps. They murmured in amazement, wondering if he was teaching Arnold how to set traps and calling him a really interesting guy. After the greetings were finished, the group led Dane to his room. As Dane followed them, he reflected in his mind that these people were really interesting, and it felt great to have a few kind friends. He thought that things were starting to get interesting now. That's a wrap. The story continues in my next video. Like and subscribe to stay notified.